I don't know if anyone saw Saturday Night Live on Saturday, but Tom Hanks was there playing Black Jeopardy as a Trump supporter, and at a certain point he said, "I really like the Tyler Perry Medea Goes to Church movies because you get to laugh and pray in the same 90 minutes." So we're going to talk about some pretty heavy justice-related issues tonight, but maybe afterwards we'll get some jokes in. So before we get started, I'd just like to take a moment to recognize where we are on the unceded land of the Huron, Haudenosaunee, Seneca, and Mississauga nations, but also the land of generations of First Nations people that have moved to Toronto, our meeting place, whose communities either here or abroad have experienced displacement because of environmental degradation and the drastic effects of industrial expansion. So thank you so much for that beautiful prayer that I have a feeling we might hear again later on this evening. But if we could just take a second, I'll ask us to take a moment of silence and concentration in respect for the land of Rome. So we could take this time now, and thanks for this opportunity to be here together in fellowship tonight, and just remember to take this with us out into the world when this is over, to share it with all people like it was once shared with us. Okay. So I'm going to talk about some pretty heavy subjects, and I'm sorry for that. I hope that it will get lighter as the night goes on, but thanks for bearing with me if this is too deep. The world over, corporations have become deeply invested in a profit-driven worldview that consequences all of creation. Wielding enormous amounts of power, industries like mining, energy development, manufacturing, and others seek to possess the full bounty of creation for the benefit of a select few. The popular term for this phenomenon is extractivism. Extractivism is the understanding of the world as a commodity, and that all things can be harvested, sold, and accumulated for personal gain. The extremity of which is seen in the growing disparity between those who have and have not. As the world is bought and sold by corporations, we begin to see consequences like environmental devastation and ecological collapse, as well as the intensification of poverty, marginalization, and human exploitation. Today we turn our attention to the immense risk extractive ideology poses to our society and the inseparability of our human and earth relationships. It is impossible for us to turn our attention from the food and water shortages that run rampant around the world. We have been moving rapidly to more and more extreme forms of mineral and fossil fuel extraction that pose greater and greater risks to our earth and make clean food and water a commodity. Over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to spend some time highlighting mostly Canadian flashpoints that paint a picture of the challenges that are in front of us, what this ideology has done to the earth, its people, and our most essential selves. It's a pretty grim look at things, but I think it's an important and transformative one as well. One that with mindfulness we can use to help reshape our view of the world and our view of community. Just north of where we are tonight, communities are seeing the effects of resource extraction on their ability to exist. In Elora, Ontario, residents have seen their water table and well levels diminish rapidly, and each summer sees drier and drier growing conditions as the Nestle Corporation holds contracts to draw millions of liters a day from public aquifers. Amidst public protest and very visible impact on the river systems that run through the region and the community's right to water resources, Nestle is in negotiations to expand their draw of water by millions more gallons per day. Not an isolated incident for the area. 20 minutes east of Elora in Orangeville, Ontario, residents were engaged in a multi-year struggle to stop an immense open-pit quarry intending to become the second largest open-pit mine in North America, with the ambition to send aggregate to the global market. Investor group Highland Companies plan to dig 200 meters into the water table, exposing ancient networks of springs that maintain the essential life-giving systems to hazardous chemicals and blasting dust. After years of opposition, this project was halted, but throughout the Dufferin County, Smaller and more challenging to monitor quarries are popping up. In both the case of Nestle in Elora and Highland Companies in Dufferin, we hear about these challenges because the impact of these capital projects has begun to affect communities that have voice and power to protect their health and well-being. Communities near to us that we can understand, and communities that look like us in ways that ask us to feel these crises ourselves. Projects like these exist unopposed in communities that are typically the most impoverished, already strained by environmental or social challenges like food and water shortages. Corporations know that it is better business sense to develop industry in areas where individuals are unable, because of their social situations, to successfully prevent the extraction of resources in their communities. 1,000 kilometers due north of Elora, in Attawapiskat, Ontario, this Northern First Nations community just down the road from the De Beers Corporation open pit, where the De Beers Corporation operates their Victor mine, pulling out $2.5 billion in diamonds from this open pit mine since its opening in 2007. This company sends the vast majority of its minerals and profits to the global market. We unfortunately know Attawapiskat well after years of headlines of housing crises, youth suicides, tainted drinking water. It is rarely mentioned that this open pit mine sits mere kilometers upriver from their community living in such desperate situations. Even less frequently mentioned is the corporation's willful ignorance in drawing thousands of liters of clean water a day from the watershed, while using harsh open-air chemicals and overloading the sewage treatment system, flooding the houses of the nearby community. After only 9 years of intense development, De Beers is now reaching the end of their Victor Mine project, having left the earth and the people that live on it irreparably scarred. They turn their sights to the next potential extraction project and the next northern community in the constant pursuit of profitability. These models of resource extraction are not exceptions, rather the rule. Throughout the country, we can find similar stories following similar narrative. Corporations putting the quest for unfettered financial growth before the well-being of people and land, preying first on those who have the least recourse to defend themselves. Oftentimes, we are unable to believe that these behaviors could be happening in our backyard, that they are the problems of the crumbling social infrastructure of failed nations abroad, or the unfortunate result of second world nations pushing for first world desires. Yet the world over, we see this desire for consumption and profit that are unsustainable. Over the last century, extractivism has become the common system of how we view the world. The philosophy of extractive industry applies monetary value to all of creation: rocks, trees, water, air, animals, often pushing the sale and trade of these commodities to the limit, resulting in ecological and humanitarian disaster. This attitude constructs a society that is interested solely on short-term gains, without thought of consequence. With a lack of ability to empathize, we see the disadvantaging of the most marginalized to become acceptable business practice. Our acceptance of extractivism has also informed our human relationships. We use the same vision to determine the value of human beings simply as a commodity that can be given arbitrary value, bought and sold without consent. We have seen this for decades in the global south, where our quest for domination caused the destruction of the earth and deep forms of poverty for people who were no longer able to sustain their independent livelihoods. For example, during the 25-year period of development in the Amazonian rainforest, in which 575,000 square kilometers of trees were extracted for export, we saw the mass displacement of millions of indigenous peoples and subsistence farmers that lived within the Amazon basin. The land was almost entirely harvested to make room for massive cattle ranching industries exporting beef to global markets. This saw the now displaced peoples living in the most extreme poverty and desperation as a cheap source of labor, and as my co-conspirator, Sister Janet Fraser says, so we can have our hamburgers. With few options, those who choose to work for the ranches, now covering their former lands, found themselves forced to work for months without pay in subhuman living conditions. The Brazilian government is aware of the brutal conditions that it often refers to as analogous to slavery, and has rescued more than 44,000 workers from exploitation on ranches and similar industries. Yet the crushing poverty and lack of options for the displaced provides a cyclical stream of labor. Canada is no stranger to the displacement of peoples from extractive industry. We have a long tradition of industrial domination of land and people. To the east, we see continued mass exodus after the collapse of the fisheries industry through its disregard for ecological sustainability. Built on the promise of an unending supply of animal resources and immense profit, the Atlantic cod industry coaxed community-led fisheries to open themselves up to amalgamation with corporate and foreign investments. Unrestricted growth of the industry quickly led to the extraction of cod past its ecological threshold and collapsed the entire coastal ecosystem. Seeing a sharp drop in profitability in their ventures, corporations pulled out of the region entirely, and like the coastal environment, the human ecosystem quickly was put into turmoil. Almost entirely dependent on the fisheries, other industries began to leave, and one by one left communities reeling to find livelihoods. This immediate poverty caused men and women to enter precarious work or travel to major urban centers in hopes of employment, causing an intergenerational rift in families that exists still to this day. To the West Coast, we are well aware of the consequences of displacement because of extractive industry. The Highway of Tears, marking the journey in which countless Indigenous women have gone missing or murdered, darts between Smithers, Prince George, McBride, all which boast extractive projects that have either pushed traditional communities off their land by sale or by pollution and environmental devastation. There is a specific challenge to this experience, with little opportunity for them in their home communities after the encroachment of industry or the total collapse of the community body. Many are pushed into the precarity that is only exacerbated by the marginalization they experience as Native peoples. Poverty and isolation and lack of transportation in these rural settings force you to have to hitchhike or to do other somewhat dangerous things to get from place to place. The lack of services, employment, and community means that for your basic survival practices, you need to travel. And if you need to get somewhere, you need to take a ride down the highway with strangers, often white men, the beneficiaries of the same industries who have caused these problems, who by choice or otherwise have accepted the narrative that these communities and people are disposable. So with these factors ever present, informing our social framework and conditions, it is no wonder why so many have gone missing on this highway. This situation plays out across Canada, which we see in the extent of missing and murdered Indigenous women from coast to coast. Extractivism has become to include the body itself, separated from spirit, culture, and identity, as a commodity that can be used to the extent of its value and discarded. This is a dramatic reality we exist within. It doesn't take much more than turning on our televisions or our news feeds to see this rhetoric of extractivism playing out in all aspects of our political and social spheres. The more we see unchallenged extractive ideology in our daily lives, the more we allow it to inform how we see each other and ourselves. It is simple tools that are being used to convert us to this ideology. Our world now a place where we have so wholeheartedly accepted the guise of the system that is blatantly being displayed in front of us. Yet even the system itself understands its instability. We have a global political discourse that is defined by manipulation, racism, sexism, and exclusion. Moving from one vulnerable and powerless group to the next with intense thirst, creating excluded segments of our population, validated with rhetoric that diminishes the inherent value and dignity of increasingly large identities, to which point we all may be consumed. We have all the facts in front of us that this view of the world has become unstable and unsustainable, not just from a resource perspective, but a moral one. Pope Francis makes a plea, and of course we're going to talk about Pope Francis in this dialogue. Pope Francis makes a plea that we take the time to meditate on the connection between resource extraction and environmental change. between environmental change and human displacement and isolation and its impacts on our spirits. Francis reminds us that the unending quest for profit, the desire for material accumulation, has altered the sacredness of our human relationships. What should be central to our spirituality is becoming foreign to us, as we have entered a space in which we are told to value the primacy of personal pleasure at the disadvantage of the weak. Francis is calling for us to make these connections inside ourselves and embrace the challenge of interconnectedness and interbeing. We are going to need to look within ourselves and start to ask, what type of people do we want to be at this point in our history? Because only through a shift in our collective desires and resisting the acceptance of these systems will we see a positive change. So we ask ourselves, how do we meet these challenges in front of us? Our world in pain, our brothers and sisters and others weak and excluded, our society and communities designed to serve only a select few, and we see this as well beginning to happen in our faith communities. A place that is meant to be in the reverence of the presence of God on earth. As we are taught to internalize extractive ideology, it has pushed relational concepts like kindness, enthusiasm, welcoming, sweetness, and understanding out of our lives to accept this story of what garnishes us power and privilege as the most important pursuits. So these qualities become things we begin to forget or to cultivate in ourselves. Yet these are the things that faith has traditionally allowed us to receive. That through our love for God, we are called to unconditional kindness, sweetness, tenderness, and welcoming of one another. This was the radical call to be in community of faith that sustained the early Christians, with the knowledge that the idea of God is present in each of us, and is fulfilled when it is held in relationship with one another. Early Christians who were indeed in similar realities to us today, who heeded the call then to break down the institutions and systems that sought the separation of their communities and spirits from that cannibalistic economic model. For them, that fellowship and the depth of entwinement of their spirits meant they held faith beyond empire. They held faith beyond empire. Even if they were unable to imagine something different, they were certain that through resistance there was something better to come. But we see it today that extractive ideology is becoming present in our face as well. It's becoming present in the way we see our relationship with God's love and how we see the institution of the church. Our societal systems are doing everything to inform us that we solely are the ones that are deserving as individuals, and that the more we can maintain our individual power, the better. That there is somehow a scarcity of God's love. That we receive love when we are good people of our world, and we can receive this benevolence when we hold ourselves to follow the law, follow the morality, follow the economy presented to us. One way that all of this is enacted is stigma and bias, creating exclusion around specific groups of people that we can say do not deserve as much as we do. It is too easy to pathologize people to a place where they have no identity, no story, no narrative. They are simply a drug user, a sex worker, a trans person, the outsider, the convict, the commodity, the body. Of course, our system needs this because it allows us to point the finger and say, this person is bad, and because they are bad, they aren't deserving of my love, and they aren't deserving of our community, and ultimately it doesn't matter if extractive industry pushes them aside, and they become displaced, upheaved, threatened, or killed. A commodity, simply, that is a building block to produce this view of the world. So we already know who are the outsiders in our communities, those on the fringes of our society, the angry, the uneducated, those in unending, upheaving crisis, those in most need of care, of love, and a sense of welcoming. So what I propose today is a call to reconnection. This is something that starts with each one of us here, and obviously what an important place to be speaking on this topic. It's a faith group that meets in a downtown bar. I think you're well on your way to reconnecting. And I've been to the Imperial Pub before, and that's a bar that I think might scare some clergy, so you're doing good. Certainly you are already well on your way but there will always be a place for interrogation. At the beginning of this talk, I spoke about the resistance of Nestle happening in the Elora area, an area of mainly white, mainly middle-class families, people that look very much like me, for whom it's not dangerous to stand up against industry. They have the voice and influence to do so. I was actually recently in Elora for their Riverfest festival, and they are marching through the downtown of Elora against the challenge to their community's health and well-being, where grandmothers, children, teens, workers, people with disabilities, you name it, all manner of people you can imagine. They all seem to be familiar with one another, all in good association, chatting about the day. I thought to myself then, it doesn't even matter what this fight was about, or what will come, or what will happen after that. They worked actively to deepen their community, to know each other, to be in acceptance and unity with one another. They connected with one another, and that's the antithesis of extractive ideology. These corporate projects succeed when we are fragmented from one another. Pope Francis lays out in his encyclical the definition of this process, and in his final prayer he makes the ask of all of us to come into this reconnection. Not just where it is easy or convenient, but to be in communion where it is absolutely challenging for us, where it is not seen and where it is not believed. To hold each other up and amplify our struggles. He asks of us to create a depth of community across the planet, to come to know one another again, each of us in all things whose spirits were lit from the same candle, who hold the same flame inside them. That in every step and every action we are moving with the whole of creation. So we heard it already, but I'm going to read it again because it's such an important prayer. I'm going to end with Pope Francis's prayer for the earth, the final prayer of Laudato Si. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect the life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it. That we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who only look for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Thank you very much.